that is about Introduction to Political Theory. So, in this entire course, we are learning about what is politics and what is political theory, and we are covering today's class. We are covering about rights, democracy, and gender. So, half part of rights is already being done in my previous session. In today's class, I will be covering theories of rights and human rights. In Unit 7, Democracy, I will be covering meaning of democracy, what are the advantages. Also, we will be learning about types of democracy and how Indian democracy is working. Apart from Unit 7, we will be covering half part of gender, that is about what is gender, gender and politics, gender equality as a goal, and why gender equality is necessary. Also, we will be talking about gender issues and trends. So, in this entire today's session, we will be covering three important parts of political theory course, and all these three are very very important and very very important to understand clearly. So try to focus that how these things are working. What is the meaning of democracy? We have heard this term democracy often, and it is very important to understand what democracy means. Also, we have heard about gender, but it is very very important to understand gender deeply. Along with that, we will be covering various theories of rights in today's session. So today's session is very very important, and it is very important to understand all these concepts clearly. Now, so let's move on with Unit 6, rights. To introduce rights, you should always remember that rights are rightly called social claims, which help individual attain their best selves and help them develop their personalities. So, what is being said here is that we can call and we can say that rights, what is right? Right is called social claims. When we when we socially claim something. And why rights are important? Because it helps individuals so that they can attain their best self, they can develop their personalities, and for that they require rights. So if we are living in a democracy, people needs rights to exist, because it is very very important, very very essential component of a democracy that each and individual has equal rights. Also, do remember that states do not give rights, they only recognize them. So it is not state who is giving us right, they can only recognize rights. Also, the government which is in power never grant rights, they only protect them. So what is the role of a state regarding rights? They can recognize rights. And what is the role of governments regarding rights? It is to protect the rights of the individuals. Also, rights emanate from a society from peculiar social conditions, and therefore they are always social. So do remember that rights are always social in nature. Now let's move on to theories of rights. What are the theories of rights? There are so many. Here you can see there are five theories of rights which we are going to cover today. Starting with theory of natural rights, theory of legal rights. There is also Marxist theory of rights, social theory of rights, and historical theory of rights. So these five theories we will be covering today in detail in our upcoming slides, and these theories are very very important because they all talks about rights, but the way, the perspective of understanding rights is different for each theory. So this is very very important thing to understand, that what perspective is talking about rights. So rights, they are all talking about rights, but their perspective, their way of thinking is different, and that is why it is important for us to understand these theories. Let's start with theory of natural rights. So what do we mean by natural rights and who advocated them? So this theory of natural rights is advocated by Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and important whenever you are talking about any kinds or any theories of rights, because they are the proponent of this theory. So this theory of natural rights are advocated mainly by Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau. Natural rights are possessed by men in the state of nature. So, what is a state of nature? Where there is no government, when there is no state. So, in that state of nature, natural rights are possessed by men. Who believes that? Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau believes that, and they advocated this. So, according to them, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, rights are inalienable, imprescriptible, and indefeasible. So, what are these terms about? Inalienable means nobody can take, your nobody can take away your right. Also, these rights are so essential that it is imprescriptible and also indefeasible. So these what is state of nature here, it is very important to understand, because there is no existence of any kind of authority. That stage or that society is known as state of nature, when there is no one to guide, when there is no authority there, when there is no government. That situation is known as state of nature. And Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau talks about that during that time when there was no authority, no state, no government, no rules and regulation. Since that time, men possess natural rights. That is why it is natural rights, the name. But there are also critics who argue that there can never be rights before the emergence of a society. Do remember that in the previous slide we have read that rights are social claims. So critics argue that without forming a society, how can rights be given? So this is what critics argue about natural rights, because according to them, rights presupposes the existence of some kind of authority to protect them. So as we have learned that it is the government who protect them. So rights can exist, but there should be a kind of authority which will be protecting the rights. So these are the critiques about the natural rights that has been advocated by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Now let's move on to theory of legal rights. So what is legal right and how it is different from natural rights? So rights here are granted by the state. So the proponents of legal rights or the theory of legal rights, they say that it is the state who is granting the rights, and who advocated these legal rights. It is Lasky, Bentham, Hegel, and Austin. So these thinkers, are the proponents of theory of legal rights. And according to them, state lays down a legal framework which guarantees rights, and it is the state which enforces the enjoyment of rights. So here it is said that it is the legal framework which supports, which protects the right, and it is the duty of the state who is going to enforce the enjoyment of rights. Also, law creates and sustains rights. So when the content of law changes, the substance of rights also changes. So this is also a very important point here, that laws are creates and sustains right, but there is also a change of law. So accordingly, rights also changes. Now let's particularly focus on Lasky's theories of legal right. How and why Lasky is different and why we are studying this, we will get to know here. So there are social conditions given to the individual as a member of society. So according to Lasky, legal rights are social conditions and it is given to an individual because he or she is a member of a society. So these legal rights help promote individual personality, his best life, those social conditions without no man can seek to be his best self. So, Lasky says that rights are social because they are never against social welfare. So, there is no rights that is formed which is against social welfare, and that is why Lasky argues that the nature of rights are social. Why? Because they are never against social welfare. Also, Lasky says that state only recognizes and protects rights by maintaining them. State is no one to provide rights. State is no one to take away rights. The According to Lasky, it is the duty of state to recognize and protect rights by maintaining them. So this is what the state plays a role in the matter of rights. Also, Lasky says that rights are never absolute. This is very important point, that nobody's rights can be absolute, and also rights are dynamic in nature and contents change according to place, time, and conditions. So Rights are dynamic in nature. This is a very, very important point that you should note it down. And the contents change according to place, time, and conditions. As I told you in my previous slide, that laws, the contents of laws changes over time, so that the rights also changes from this to that. So here also we are saying, Lasky also agreeing that rights are dynamic and they can change according to place, time, and conditions. Also, rights go along with duties. Duties are prior to rights. So it is not like that you get all the rights but you don't have to do anything. No. You also have some kind of duties to play so that you can fulfill the rights of the person standing against you. So all persons have rights also along with duties, and duties are prior to rights. Lasky's argument is that without granting economic rights, an individual cannot enjoy his political rights. What Lasky argues is that without granting economic right, an individual cannot enjoy his political rights. So for Lasky, economic right is prior to political rights. Also, critics say that if we admit that rights are states' creation, then they can also take it away. So here, what critics are saying that states creates rights and also they can take it away. So there is a possibility, which is the critique of Lasky's theories of legal rights. Now, moving forward, let's talk about historical theory of rights. What do we mean by historical theory of rights? So, historical theory of rights are also called the prescriptive theory. Do note it down, underline this, because many times you will be asked to tell about prescriptive theory and you will be confused that what does we mean by prescriptive theory. Prescriptive theory is equal to historical theory. So this is important. So historical theory of rights are also called the prescriptive theory. Rights grow from traditions and customs. So what does this historical theory of rights are saying is that you can say that rights are growing from traditions and customs of a particular society. So, this historical theory of rights has its origin in the 18th century in the writings of Edmund Burke. So, it was the Edmund Burke who proposed this historical theory of rights. And according to him, people have a right over anything that they exercise or enjoy uninterruptedly over a fairly long passage of time. So what Burke is saying that it is the people who have right over a particular thing and they exercise or enjoy uninterruptedly over a fairly long passage of time. It's called right. So every right is based on the force of long observation. This is also a very, very important line that we have read in historical theory of rights, where it is said that right is based on the force of long observation, and but critiques also say that all our customs cannot be resulted in rights. For example, sati system. So if we talk about India, here Edmund Burke is saying that people have a right over anything that they are exercising or enjoying uninterruptedly over a fairly long passage of time. So any kind of thing which is going for a very long time according to traditions and customs became right. So let's talk about sati system, which is a very, a social evil where women are being burnt alive on the funeral pyre of their husband. So it is going on for a very long time. So according to Edmund Burke, it is the right to do sati. It is a right to do sati. But here we can say that sati is something which is going on from ancient times, but it has many social problems, and women are being burnt alive, which is not a very good sign of a society. So here it is being critiqued that this custom is also going on, but that doesn't mean that you can make it as a right, because that is killing people and it is hampering the right of that women. So as we all know that rights are equal for everyone, so does that women and men, both of them have right to life, and this sati system was curtailing the right of that women who is being burnt alive on the funeral pyre of their husbands. So this is what critique says about historical theory of rights. Now let's move forward and talk about social welfare theory of rights. Let's see what does this mean. Rights are the conditions of social welfare. This is what this theory talks about. State should recognize only such rights which help promote social welfare. So they are arguing that a state should say that should promote a right which promotes self social welfare. So rights are the creation of the society, and in as much as they are based on the consideration of the common welfare. So what is being said here is that the ultimate aim of right should be social welfare, common welfare. But here, critics say that it dwells on the factor of social welfare, the term too vague to be precise. What do we mean by social welfare? So, this is something which should be, defined properly, which is not there, and that is why the term is very vague to be precise. Now let's move forward to Marxist theory of rights. So Marxist theory of rights is understood in terms of the economic system. So whenever we are trying to understand Marxist theory of rights, we are going to understand the economic system because the theory of right is understood in those terms. So the state being an instrument in the hands of economically dominant class, and it will protect the system of rights favoring them. So what Marxist believes is that the state, which is going to protect the rights, are instrument in the hands of the people coming from well-off classes, rich background, and it will protect the system of rights favoring them. So if state is being a tool in the hand of the big landlords and rich people, then state will favor only those rights which will be favoring those rich people, because state himself or itself is a tool in the hand of those rich background people. So according to Marx, class which controls the economic structure of society also controls the power which it uses to protect and promote its own interest. So this is what Marx's theory of rights is all about. Now let's move forward towards human rights. So S. Ramphal said that human rights were not born of men, but they were born with them. So according to Ramphal, it is something which is born with them. Human rights born with an individual. Also, these human rights are inherent to our nature and without which we cannot live as human beings. So, because we are human beings, we require human rights, and this human rights permeate the entire UN Charter. So, there is UN General Assembly who approved this declaration on December 10, 1948. Do remember this date because it is celebrated as Human Rights Day. And later on, as we say that it is celebrated as Human Rights Day, 10th of December, started in 1948. So, what are the human rights? Like, what are the rights included in this? It includes right to life, liberty, security, freedom from arbitrary arrest, to a fair trial, equal protection of law, freedom of movement, and seek asylum, etc., etc. So, all these rights comes under human rights. Okay, so we have completed with our rights unit 6. Now we will be moving towards democracy, which is a very, very important uh, unit. So let's start with meaning of democracy. What do we mean by it? So democracy is believed to be originated in Athens in the 5th century BC. So this concept of democracy is originated in Athens, which is a Greek city-state, Greece, the country, and Athens is a city-state in democracy in Greece, where democracy emerged in the 5th century BC. So the word democracy is derived from two Greek words. Demokratia. The entire word is demokratia, and it is a combination of two Greek words, that is demos, that means people, and kratos, mean power. So if you need to find the meaning, it is the power of people that democratia means. So democracy stands for rule by the people and the government which is based on the consent of the ruled. So here we should see that a democracy can only exist when the ruled, that means the citizens, the people upon whom there are rules, so the rule should give consent to be ruled. This is what democracy is all about. Now let's move on and see what are the advantages of democracy. Why we always talk about democracy? What is, the important feature of democracy? So, according to J.S. Mill, the first advantage is that democracy compels the decision makers to take into account public interest and opinion. So let's start with knowing the meaning of democracy. So, democracy is believed to be originated in a city state Athens in Greece in the 5th century BC. So, from where we know that democracy emerged, we know that it is in Greece. The name of the place is Athens, which is a city state in Greece in the 5th century BC. So, the word democracy is derived from the Greek word demokratia. Let's know what does this demokratia word mean. So a combination of two or Greek words is formed as demokratia. And what are these two Greek words? It is the demos, which literal meaning of democracy is power of people. So democracy stands for rule by the people, and the government, which is based on the consent of the ruled. So here it is very, very important to understand that what does democracy mean? It means the rule of people and not by any monarch who inherited that position. It is always the rule of people, and to form a government which is backed by the consent of the people who are being ruled. So let's talk about the advantages of democracy. So according to J.S. Mill, the first advantage is that democracy compels the decision makers to take into account of the public interest and opinions. So what is the first advantage? Because we have know that democracy is about the rule of people and the consent that it requires to rule. So J.S. Mill says that whenever we talks about democracy and whenever we try to uh, bring democracy in a society, the first and foremost thing is that the decision makers who are in power and making decisions, they should take into account the public interest and their opinion, which would not be the case in any authoritarian or aristocratic form of government. So this type of rule where the public interest and opinions are important and they are taken into account by the government is only being done in democracy and not in any kind of authoritarian or aristocratic form of government. Next is democracy brings in multiple views in the process of decision making, which allows the decision makers to pick up the best idea. So, in a democracy, because people are there to rule themselves and their consent is being taken, so here the decision makers can have multiple of ideas, multiple perspectives to choose the best one. So this is being possible only in democracy. Thirdly, democracy helps in character building of citizens and it inculcates qualities like as rationality, autonomy, and independent thinking. So democracy gives and paves way for a person to think rationally. Also, he or she is having autonomy and independent thinking. Now let's see what do we mean by direct versus representative democracy, starting with direct democracy. So direct democracy is based on direct and unmediated citizen participation in the government rule. So what does this direct democracy mean? Where there is unmediated citizen participation while voting and while in government rule. Also, all adult citizens take part in decision making in direct democracy. This is also a very important part. So, direct democracy wipes out the distinction between the government and the governed and the state and civil society. So, this direct democracy it wipes out the distinction, the differences between government and the governed. Also, direct democracy ensures greater legitimacy as people are more likely to follow decisions which are taken by them only. So because the in democracy it is the rule by the people, so here the decisions are being accepted by people because they are taken by them only. So in ancient Greek city-state model was an example of direct democracy because as we have learned about Athens and all, so in that area in Greece, in that country, city states of Greece, you can find direct democracy practiced, but nowadays it can be found in Swiss cantons. Also, practicing direct democracy is difficult in big modern nation states because it is very, very difficult to, accommodate a huge population while doing direct democracy practices. Now let's talk about representative democracy. What do we mean by that? So, representative democracy is limited and indirect form of democracy. You should remember that we have learned about direct, and what do we mean by representative? It is indirect. So, this indirect, why? Because it is indirect, because people do not exercise power directly, but through their elected representatives. So, here we living in a representative democracy, we elect our representative, and in our place it is the representative who is taking decision on behalf of us. So presidential and parliamentary democracies are two main types of representative democracy around the world. Do note it down, it is very, very important that two kinds of democracies, that is presidential form, which have the head of the state in the form of a president, and in parliamentary form it is the head of the government who is, plays a very important role, prime minister. So the presidential and parliamentary democracies are two main types. So in presidential also the head of the state and the head of the government is same, that is president, but in parliamentary form it is the head of the government, that is prime minister. And there is also a president who is a titular head, or you can say it can be a monarch also. So, presidential and parliamentary democracies are two main types of this representative democracy, which we can find in many countries. So, parliamentary democracies are more representative than the presidential, but at the same time, they are relatively less stable. So, what are the advantages of parliamentary democracy over presidential? Is that they are more representative in nature as compared to presidential. But when we talk about the plus point of presidential democracy, they are more stable as compared to the parliamentary form of democracy. Now, let's move on towards types of democracy, starting with classical democracy. So, classical democracy is based on the polis or the city state of ancient Greece. As I told you, that democracy emerged there. So, in this classical democracy model, citizens were politically very active. So here the participation of people is very, very, they participate actively. And classical democracy is a model where citizens participate very actively. Also contributed to decision making and public offense. So not only they are politically active, the citizens, but also they contribute to decision making and public offices. But classical democracy excludes women, slaves, foreigners from citizenship. So whenever we are talking about citizen can do this, citizen can decide, citizen can part of decision can be part of decision making process and public offices. But here it is very important to understand that this category of citizen is excluded because by women, slaves, and foreigners. So they are not given that tag of citizen. They are outside citizenships. They're excluded from citizenship. So they are not a part of classical democracy in the ancient Greek time. So their exclusion from citizenship was unfortunate and undemocratic. So on one hand we are saying that classical democracy is rule of people, but here the category excludes a very, very significant population, that is women, mostly the half of the population, also slaves and foreigners, and that is why this is also known as very unfortunate and undemocratic in nature. Next comes the elitist democracy. The theory of elitist democracy was propounded by Wilfredo Pareto, G. Mosca, Robert Michels, and Joseph Schumpeter. So these are the propounders of this elitist democracy type. So Michels have his iron law of oligarchy, where every organization is ultimately reduced to oligarchy, amounting to rule of a few. So Michel says that wherever you go, the democracy ultimately comes in the hand of people. Handful of people are taking decisions, taking, public decisions. So because they ultimately reduce to an oligarchy, most of the power, prestige, and wealth are in hands of the ruling class, irrespective of the form of government. So what Michelle says is that whatever democracy we say, people rule here, it is the rule of people. But elitist democracy says that it is about power, and people having more power, prestige, and wealth, they have, they become the ruling class. So the ruled follow the elite as they do not have leadership qualities. Also, this theory poses a serious questions for democracy. This is, a kind of finding the criticisms of democracy. So this elitist theory do that. Now let's talk about pluralist democracy. So pluralists believe that policy making is a decentralized process where different groups bargain for their views to be accepted. So pluralist democracy say that it is a process which is very decentralized because groups bargain for their views to be accepted, because all of them are providing ideas, all of them are providing their views, and the best view is being chosen. So here they bargain for their views to be accepted. So it is result of interaction between different groups, unlike few elites. So in pluralist democracy, they are saying that it is a group which meet, which discuss, which interact with each other, but not few elites. So public policy is formulated by more organized and vocal groups. Also, the main proponent of this theory include Karl Mannheim, Raymond Aron, Robert Dahl, and Charles Lindblom. So these are the thinkers who talks about this pluralist theory of democracy. Now let's come to participatory democracy. So all the democracies are participatory in the sense that they are based on popular consent, which ensures their participatory nature. So here this is very important because democracies are participatory because people are participating in that. They are giving their consent, and that is why democracies are participatory in nature. So, in contrast to elitist and pluralist theories, participatory democracy advocates active citizen participation in policy making to ensure common good is promoted. So, what is happening here is that they are against, and their idea is, different from the elitist and the pluralist theory, and they believes that active citizen participation in policy making ensure common good is promoted. So the ultimate is aim of participatory democracy is common good, and because many citizens participate in, they deliberate among each other, they interact with each other, they ensure a common good. So it makes the government more accountable towards the citizens. So participatory democracy is saying that this system of democracy can make the government more accountable towards the citizen. So who are the supporters of this participatory democracy? It is J.J. Rousseau, J.S. Mill, C.B. Macpherson supported this idea of participatory democracy. Now let's move on towards deliberative democracy. So the deliberative democracy argues that political decisions should be based on fair and reasonable deliberations among citizens. So what does this deliberative democracy mean? Deliberations. So this deliberative democracy, they say that political decisions should be based on fair, first of all, and reasonable deliberations among citizens. So deliberations are very important. So this is required to produce the best decision to achieve public good. So here also the ultimate aim is the public good, the common good, and whenever people will deliberate reasonably among each other, they will be producing best decisions so that they can achieve that public good. So who, it is the who propounded this and who supports this deliberative democracy. The supporters are John Rawls, Jürgen Habermas, who argues for a deliberative democracy. Now let's talk about people's democracy. People democracy refers to democratic models generated by the Marxist tradition. You should know that people's democracy is equal to Marxist theory of democracy, and they are the one who generated this Marxist tradition. So people's democracy is established after the proletarian revolution, when the proletariat start making political decisions. So In Marxist theory, there is always an aim where the proletariats will be ruling the society, and that time the people's democracy will be established after the proletariat revolution, where proletariats means the working class, the labor class people who are not economically powerful. The other the other category of people according to Marxist are bourgeoisies, who are land owning classes, who have means of production, or who have all the resources with them. So Marxists believe that the proletariat revolution will get rid of the bourgeoisies, who are the rich landowning classes, and when proletariats will be establishing a society, there they will start with people's democracy, where they will be taking the political decisions. Who? The proletariat. Marxist believes that this will eventually give way to communism marked by self-regulation. So Marxist theory's ultimate aim is to create a society which will be governed on the basis of communist ideology, and that is why this proletariat revolution, which will bring people's democracy, will ultimately give way to communism marked by self-regulation. Now let's talk about social democracy. Social democracy stands for basic change in Marxist thought, although it shares same goals with communism. So this social democracy is also, similar to people's democracy. Their aim is same, but there is a basic change in their thought process. So social democracy aims to establish a socialist society, but not through the revolution, but through state regulation of means of production. So here, in the previous one, in people's democracy, you have find that it is Marxist to believe that there should be a proletarian revolution. Here in social democracy, they don't want any kind of revolution, but they want the state to take regulatory means of production, so that the same goals could be. Social democrats see democracy as essential for achieving the socialist ideals. So here, social democracy is little bit different from people's democracy, because their mean to achieve the goal is different from the people's democracy. Now let's discuss about e-democracy. So this that means electronic democracy, is a new concept which is based on the works done by earlier theorists. So this electronic democracy is the use of information and technology to enhance or even replace representative democracy. So the supporters of this e-democracy have built on the ideas of participatory democracy to enhance active citizen participation in policy making. So this is what e-democracy hopes for. Now let's talk about Indian democracy. So India is referred to as the largest democracy in the world, with more than 800 million eligible voters, and it's still increasing. So India adopted parliamentary form of democracy, keeping in view India's past experience with the system. So because the Britishers also followed the parliamentary form of government, that is why India also inherited this parliamentary form of democracy. And also after independence, there are periodic elections that is going on based on the universal adult franchise, and which ensured that democratic institutions and practices are firmly rooted in Indian politics. When India got independent, India was facing lots of problems, and still in that difficult condition also, India sustained with elections. India uh, arranged for an elections in the 1952 times. The first general elections happened that time. So since then, there are periodic elections that is going on, which is based on a universal adult franchise. Now, let's move towards Unit 8, Gender. We will be covering half of Unit 8 today and half in the next session. So start with, let's talk about what is gender. So the word gender is being used sociologically or as a conceptual category. So it is basically a conceptual category. And in its new incarnation, gender refers to the socio-cultural definition of man and women. So what do this gender, what is gender? It is referring the socio-cultural definition of man and women. The society distinguishes men and women and assign them social roles. For example, the social role of a man is to go out and work, earn living, come back and keep a family and provide all the basic amenities to a family. The assigned role, social role of a woman is to keep the family happy, take care of the family, take care of children. You have to be very compassionate, you have to be very kind, you know, you have to be very submissive. And it is man who is providing all the resources, and it is the duty of the women to take care of the household chores. These are the social roles that is being assigned to man and women. The distinction between sex and gender was introduced to deal with the general tendency to attribute women's subordination to their anatomy. So, there is a difference between sex and gender. So, gender is a socially created category, whereas sex is something which is biological categories. So, gender and sex are two different identities of a person, because it is gender which provides you with certain kind of role, to be kind, to be compassionate, to be a caregiving individual for women, whereas sex is a biological distinction between a male and a female. So all the social and cultural packaging that is done for boys and girls from birth onwards is called gendering. So this is very important to understand. What does this gendering mean? Giving a boy child or a kid a car, a gun, signifies that he is being diverted towards an area and a situation where he is going to drive the car. He is one who will be protecting the family, whereas girls are given, toys like kitchen sets. They are given dolls, because it is being inculcated in them from the childhood that your duty is to do the household chores, take care of the people in your family. And this is what is known as gendering, which started from the birth of a child. According to Anne Oakley, gender is a matter of culture. It refers to the social classification of men and women into a masculine and feminine. So it is a categorization, classification of women, which is being done socially. So, gender is deeply embedded in every aspect of society, in our institutions, public spaces, art, clothing, and movement. So, you can see that there is always a gender which is deeply embedded in our day to day life. The concept of gender needs to be understood clearly as a cross cutting socio-cultural variable such as race, class, age, ethnic group, etc. So the gendered roles are learned through socialization processes. They are not fixed but are changeable. But the concept of gender is not interchangeable with women. Gender refers to both women and men and the relations between them. So, gender inequalities stem from relations of power and authority, class caste hierarchies, and socio cultural traditions, customs, and norms. Now let's talk about gender and politics. Equality between men and women has become the dominant ideal within the mainstream political discourse. So, men and women should naturally have the same rights, and no one should be excluded from political life. Both of them should practice and study. The politics have long been a notoriously masculine endeavors. So it is a naturally, they should have same rights, but it is notoriously from a very long time a masculine endeavor. What? The politics. So many commentators have argued that politics has historically been the most explicitly masculine human activity of all, which we have studied in the slide of democracy, where we have seen that during the classical democracy, women, slaves, and foreigners were not allowed to take part in politics. They are not allowed to take part in the public sphere. So here this is the same, because politics was always considered a arena of man. So women have by and large been excluded from traditional political activity and discouraged from defining their activities as political, because they are supposed to stay at home, take care of the child, and take care of the all the things that is going on in the private sphere and not public sphere. Let's talk about gender equality as a goal. So, gender equity denotes an element of interpretation of social justice, usually based on traditions, customs, religion, or culture, which is most often to the detriment of women. So, gender equality means that the rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of individuals will not depend on whether they are born male or female. But the equality does not mean the same as. So the promotion of gender equality does not mean that women and men will become same. They are different, but they should be treated equally. So equality between women and men has both a quantitative and a qualitative aspect. So equality between women and men has both, quantitative and qualitative aspect. So quantitative aspect is that it refers to the desire to achieve equitable representation of women that will automatically increase the balance and parity. So quantitative aspect talks about the equal representation of women, whereas qualitative aspect refers to achieving equitable influence on establishing development priorities and outcomes for men and women. So, equality involves ensuring that the perceptions, interests, needs, priorities of women and men will be given equal weight in planning and decision making. Let's talk about why gender equality is necessary. Equality between women and men is a matter of human rights and social justice. So, the greater equality between women and men is also a precondition and effective indicator for sustainable people centered development. This is why it is very, very important to have gender equality. Let's talk about the issues and trends in gender. Starting with inequalities in political power, that means to get access to decision making and representation. So women are underrepresented throughout the world. That is being that is a very known thing, and there is a need to understand the gender differences in power. Also, representation and low underrepresentation and low visibility of women's perspective. The fact that women often have different priorities, needs, and interests than men is not often apparent. So, national, regional, or sub regional priorities, or even the specific needs and priorities of the community, are often defined without meaningful inputs from the women. Now, let's talk about inequalities within the household. So, inequalities in negotiating and decision making, potential and access to resources have been documented within households. So, the investigation of differences and inequalities at the household level is relevant to an understanding of a range of key issues. So, here we can see that there is always inequalities that is being documented within a household. There is also differences in legal status and entitlements. So there are constitutional and international instruments which talks about equal rights for women and men, but there are many instances in which we can see that the equal rights such as to personal status, security, land, inheritance, employment opportunities are denied to women by law or practice. So this is what it requires to be changed. Next comes the division of labor within the economy. So, in most countries, women and men are distributed differently across manufacturing sectors, between both formal and informal sectors, within agricultural and among occupations. So, women are also more likely than men to be in low paid jobs and non standard work. Also, they have less access to the productive assets such as education, skills, property, and credit. Women are being denied of all these opportunities, and this pattern means that economic trends and economic policies are likely to have different implications for women and men. Next comes the inequalities in the domestic and unpaid sector, where you can find that in most of the countries, women shoulder responsibility and task to care, related to care and nurturing the family, and this is what is unpaid sector. Let's come and talk about violence against women. So there is gender inequality is also manifested in gender based violence. So we can see that there are so many cases in domestic violence and so many cases of intimate partner violence where it is psychological violence or sexual violence. So these kinds of violence were in rise during the COVID time, that is being highlighted by United Nations, that during the COVID, the already worsened situations of women due to domestic violence was on rise. So this issue of domestic violence is still not properly done. Next come the discriminatory attitudes. So gender inequalities are not only economic but are also in, they are difficult to measure and change. So there are discriminations that is happening. So with this I end my lecture today. Thank you.